have different holes, and those really become, within each hole, you have your set of decision makers. And so it's really important, we think, and this is where the framework has been so valuable for us, like we have mentioned, that if you know all of your decision makers and you can get their opinion and they have an opportunity to speak for themselves, even if they're not in the day-to-day decisions, even if their one decision is, like Joshua's sister, to say, I am making a conscious choice to speak with my own words to say, I'm not interested in this part of this succession plan or of this piece of the agriculture. So to let people speak for themselves is very, very valuable. So in the framework, it's identifying your holes, identifying who the decision makers are within your whole, and then those decision makers work to create that holistic context or that holistic goal that really speaks to what do you want for your quality of life. And if you want to make small changes, change how you do things. If what you are after is making big changes with impact, we change how we see things.
That was a quote that I heard at a conference, a holistic management conference years ago. It was actually up in Canada. And that hit me because it hit me pretty hard because there were some significant things that I thought we needed to change. And how did we try to address those changes? We kept trying to tweak things a little bit. We kept trying to change what we were doing. And we were not getting anywhere. Like we'd have little wins along the way, but we were not changing the whole model. We were not changing the structure. And so this gentleman, his name was Don Campbell, and he's a long-time rancher. This is like when you hit the Canadian border, you got to drive another 10 or 12 hours north until you hit their ranch. So as a North Dakotan, I'm probably not complaining about our winters as much as it might be up there. But the point is that when he said this, I'm like, there's the key. Our whole world changed when we started seeing the ranch as not this asset that we're going to need to deal with, but as a place of tremendous opportunity. When we started seeing running livestock as a profitable enterprise, we just needed to see it a little differently and operate it a little differently. That didn't happen by just changing what bulls we ran or putting in another cross fence or something like that. We had to see the whole thing differently. And so that's why big changes and seeing things is quite a bit different than small changes and doing things. If you go back to the previous slide once, one other thing I wanted to point out. I'm in my early 40s. Well, does 44 still count? Early 40s? If we're rounding down, right? Okay. I'm already thinking about retirement. Does that surprise you? Do you think most people here's what's interesting. If you go outside of agriculture, so put farming and ranching and that sort of thing aside, when you hear about a typical age that people are going to retire from their jobs, what age do you think of? 65? Okay, now I'm not saying that's for everybody. I'm just saying that that's something that's kind of typical in America, right? And if we think of transition in terms of not only transition the assets, but transition the knowledge, the wisdom, being able to work alongside of each other in a multi-generational deal, I've often seen proactive operations have like a 20-year overlap. Well, if you typically retire at 65, and the overlap is 20 years, at what age might you start thinking about what retirement looks like? 45. Most operations that we work with, I'd say we're 65 before they start thinking about it. And then it becomes a rush or a panic depending on how life's playing out at that point. Now, just thinking about retirement does not mean that you're done. It does not mean that you're spent. It does not mean that you're at the end of your career and you have less value. In my mind, it means that you're being on top of your game. Now, I don't care if you're 45 or 55 or 65, older or younger than that. The point is that retirement has a negative, when it comes to agriculture, seems to have a negative stigma to it. Everybody else in the world works their whole lives for what? To get to retirement. And what do? We like to blow right past it and hope we can go another 20. Now, part of that's because we love what we do, right? For the most part. We have challenging days, challenging years or seasons, but we love what we do. It's this labor of love, but sometimes it gets in our way of making sure that we're making the most strategic decisions that we could along the way. And just because we're talking about retirement, or thinking about retirement, or strategically making moves in retirement, you might be doing that when you're in the prime of your career. And so we are actually talking about that now to some degree, about what that looks like, and we're finding that we have lots more options than I think we're going to have if we wait another 20 years to have those conversations. Retirement is not necessarily something we aspire to, but keep in mind, we're not going to retire from something. What are we going to do? We're going to retire to something, and I'm actually looking forward to what, I don't even know what that is yet, but I'm excited about what it could be. Because if I retire to something, they're also going to be able to move into something. Because we often see this friction between two generations. The older generation is waiting for the younger generation to step up. They're waiting, when are they going to step up? When are they really going to step up? And what's the younger generation thinking about the older generation? When are they going to step aside? When are they going to step aside? And yet nobody defines what does step aside mean and what does step up mean. It's kind of like, and Tara brings this up often, our language, because that's actually such a minimal part of our communication. People will use a term like respect. What does that mean? In your world versus my world versus her world versus your world? Have we defined what those terms mean to us? And if we can't express them, how do we expect people to live up to them? Or to be obedient to them? Or to be willing to work on them if we're not on the same page? So this whole retirement deal, in fact, I haven't figured it out yet, but I don't even like using that word. Like, I want a different word to use there so that it's enticing rather than, hey, I'm going to put up a shield because I don't want to talk about that. That means end of life stuff, right? No, that's a strategic transition in a business career that benefits not just you, but everybody else around you. Sorry, I get on a soapbox and then
I love you for it. All right, so recap. When we shifted our mindset from this trapped mentality, we think about this trapped mindset like a fixed mindset. And again, I don't mean to imply that there isn't hard work, because there is. And we still do have some loss, right? We're caring for creation, and so things die. We don't live in the Garden of Eden like Joshua said. But it's really our mindset. Are we seeing these things as burdens, or are we seeing these things as opportunities? And really, where we really got excited about the opportunity to move to the ranch was, like we said, we have an opportunity to have a multi-generational experience. We have an opportunity to decide what we want for profit. We have an opportunity to not just conserve or sustain, but to really regenerate the soil and improve soil health and improve the quality and the nutrition of the plants that we grow and the animals that we're raising and the food that we are eating, that we're consuming for ourselves or for other people. And I absolutely love the health and the wealth and just the community of people who possibly are like-minded, you know? I mean, we like to surround ourselves with positive thinking people. We also like to surround ourselves with people who are willing to ask us those hard questions. The why are you doing this? And the, you know, what is it that you really want? Some of those value things. So that's a big part of our story, is just shifting from that trapped, fixed mindset to a more freeing growth type mindset. And we've been able to do that with the help of holistic management. Where are we at for time? We have
about 8 minutes. Is the taco bar, or keep calling it taco bar, is the nacho bar ready?
Yes.
We can keep.
Okay. I'm excited about the next part that we're going to go into. Let's not play that.
I didn't mean to.
what we're going to do after we come back from our extended snack back there, we're going to dive into a couple of things that deal with our time, deal with our energy, and deal with why we're here, even though we want to go here, and what's holding us back. What's keeping us from achieving that. Now, I'm not going to promise you the moon, but I'm going to walk you through, or we're going to walk you through the process that we have utilized in order to start making some of that happen, because we were treading water for a long time.
That's true. Before we go a break to the nacho bar, where as I like to call it, rotational grazing, what questions do you have? We know that if something that we said, if it needs clarifying, of course, we'll continue after we have our next break. But do you have any questions right now of something that we've already discussed that you think needs clarifying?
It's pretty muddy at this point.
Yes.
Question.
Who decided to have the facilitator in your guys' meeting?
Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Who decided to have the facilitator for that meeting? It wasn't me.
We knew as a family, between my parents and myself, we knew that we needed some discussions to happen. I tried to facilitate those discussions to start with. And even though I was maybe starting to get trained in this, even now, even though we do this professionally, I still wouldn't try to be the own facilitator in my own family for a weekly meeting, it's one thing. But when you're trying to dive into some deep topics like succession, like we had, came to the conclusion that I can't do it. In fact, there isn't any member of our immediate family that should be doing it. And again, it doesn't come down to capability or ability. It has to do with trying to play two roles at once. You're trying to have skin in the game because you do. I did. And I was trying to be that unbiased third party.
Remain objective.
That was trying to be objective amongst everybody. But have you ever tried to ask yourself questions objectively and not, I just couldn't get it done. And so finally we got to the point where like, hey, we need a facilitator. Who can we bring in? And the gentleman's name was Wayne Berry. He was a longtime certified educator and rancher from up in northwestern North Dakota. Lots of experience, very even-keeled. And what I was most impressed with is he had known me before. We had met and visited several times. He was a mentor of mine. But I didn't get any special treatment, I can tell you that. And on top of that, like he was so observant. Like he was able to pick out body language and who liked to speak for who and who needed more opportunity to share in all of those pieces. And my expectations were exceeded because I thought, well, let's just get it all out in the open and then we can sort through it. Like by the end of the night, people had peace about where we could go. Even though we didn't answer every question, we didn't have it all figured out. We're like, hey, if we need to do another session, we're coming back to you, or we're bringing you in again. So, long answer, but it was hard for any immediate family member to do the facilitating, and that's why we needed to bring in that outside individual. And one of the things that we share is that when somebody's got to ask the hard questions, like the really hard questions, I was going to have a hard time asking those of my father or my mother, and I think they were hesitant to ask me. But Wayne, he can ask all of those, and his comment to me afterwards, he said, I think that went well, but he said, Josh, he's like, if any of you are upset with me at the end of the day, he's like, I don't care if you're upset with me. I'm leaving. All the rest of you are still a family. And so you still need to be on speaking terms and have a plan moving forward. And of course, nobody was upset with him. They were very appreciative of him. But it's like that because there's been some facilitation things that we've, as facilitators, that we've gotten into. And I know some of those questions were really uncomfortable and really difficult, but they were needed. And all we asked them to do is just trust us. We'll get you to the other side. We'll get you to the other side of this conversation, but we got to go through some rough waters to part way through because or we're never going to get anything solved. Good question.
So whose idea was it?
I think my mother actually came to me and she's like, do you know of someone that could do this?
Sounds like,
Because she said, I am not getting through to your father.
That sounds right.
And of course, my father's like, well, I don't know what she wants. I don't know what she wants. And I'm like, I will find someone. And so we did that. Question?
So then after you did that, what was the next step and what happened after that?
After that conversation, we had enough traction to where first of all, we had sorted out what role my sister was gonna play. So now my parents had clarity because they've also got other, life insurance policy and 401ks and all these other, they've got lots of different pieces in addition to the ranch. And so we had clarity, they had clarity on what role she was going to play. They knew that I was interested in the land and the farm and the ranch, regardless of the fact that at that time we were not moving there. I was willing to take that responsibility. And then they were able to start putting in place, and they ended up putting a life estate, I believe, is what into play. And of course, there's a look back period, and there's all of those pieces then that we needed to get a local attorney involved with. But they didn't want to go to an attorney and start racking up bills without clarity. So we gained enough clarity at that meeting to where we could move forward with the next step, which then led to some additional steps that we needed to have conversations about and additional resources that they needed to bank, the attorney, some of those parts. So that was a little bit of the chronological order that things went in. But the roadblock was removed in that first facilitated session. And by the way, I don't think we had any major conflict. Like it wasn't somebody was at each other, somebody thought somebody was getting ripped off or that, we didn't even deal with that. So sometimes I think people assume that, well, we only need a mediator or a facilitator if we're in a really bad situation. I thought we got along as well as any situation that we've run into, but we just couldn't go anywhere. We didn't know what we didn't know, and we couldn't pull out of each other what was really, really inside.
Yeah.
And that's what that facilitator
I think
did.
we avoided a tremendous amount of conflict by doing that. A tremendous amount.
Other questions? All right, the nachos are waiting.
Go get them.
Cats, even if they weren't cats. All right.
Okay, so the conversation we were having right before the nacho break is going to lead, I think, right into this. So we have this kind of vision of if we identify that where we are now, personally or professionally, is not where we want to be, what are some of the reasons that we are in the gap? What is holding us back?
Look it up. Yep. Yep, bye-bye.
Okay, so there are some things that keep us stuck in this gap, this where if we're feeling trapped, maybe we're feeling trapped and we're not sure how we find that freedom. Or we have this fixed mindset and we're not really sure how to get to that growth mindset. So here are the top 3 reasons that we find in our work with facilitation. It boils down to these 3 reasons why most farmers, ranchers, egg producers that we work with, and this goes beyond agriculture. This definitely goes beyond agriculture, but again, our work is primarily with the agricultural families. We get stuck in the gap when we do not know what we want. Like Joshua mentioned earlier, it's oftentimes easier to have that, and this is part of the fixed or trapped mindset, but it's easier to think about all the things that we don't want. I don't want this, I don't want weeds, I don't want whatever that is for you. So it's easier to identify what we don't want. It's harder sometimes to really be clear about what we do want. So we get stuck in the gap when we have not identified what it is we want. And when we do not know why we want it. So an example of this, we can go back to, the values-based story that we talked about with the retirement. What does retirement looks like? Why do you want more cows? Why do you want less cows? What is the value behind why you want something? I'm going to go with a personal example here too, because again, this goes beyond agriculture. There's something that we want for our family. We want a finished basement. We built a home next door to my in-laws. It's not for everyone, but we love it. And it comes with its challenges, of course, but we are navigating that like everybody else. And we would love to have our basement finished. And it's not getting done. And so this is an area in our life where we found ourselves to be stuck. So when we really talk about, okay, why do we want that? Why do we want a finished basement? It's because we want the space for our kids to be able to go down there and have their own space to play games. And because we're a family that we live there, we work there, we homeschool there, we're always there. Our kitchen table isn't a kitchen table to eat on because it's got piles of all kinds of stuff, including school and personal and junk mail and everything. So we would love to have this clear space downstairs so that the kids can go and they could do their activities, and so the boys share a room, and maybe they would love to each have their own someday. So when we really can think about why it is that we want that personal thing or that professional thing, it helps bring clarity to it, and it really helps us visualize it as a completed project. And once we can start to visualize what that looks like, a place with more cows, a place with no cows, a place with a finished clear space, when we can visualize that, we are so much more likely to achieve it. But here is the biggest reason we find that people still stay stuck. Even if they can identify what it is they want, and they can clearly identify with clarity why they want it, they think they have to do it themselves. Can you relate to this? People often get stuck in the gap because they do not have the right people identified who can help them. So, we mentioned earlier, sometimes, we're too focused on the how. Sometimes we can, like Joshua mentioned, when we finally hired a who to help us with our books, that was a major game changer in our entire operation. It improved our quality of life, it improved our finances, and it gave us more time and information to be able to make better decisions, be better decision makers. So when we can find the right people who can help us with the books, or get our basement finished, or to facilitate the conversations that we need to have, this is when we really see growth and freedom for people in their families, in their operations. I'll let you have.
Now let me tackle this slide here just real quickly from a typical farmer-rancher standpoint. You see, Tara has the opportunity to, and this is one of the greatest values I believe that we have on our ranch, is we have someone who didn't grow up on that ranch, didn't even grow up with ranching or farming. And so the types of questions that she's able to ask and the things that she's able to see that the rest of us are stuck in provides perspective that we wouldn't have otherwise. And Tara also gets to speak to quite a few non-agricultural groups and a lot of moms groups and families and those types of organizations or businesses. But if we dive deep into the rancher perspective of this, or just agricultural people in general, I think, we don't know what we want. We might actually kind of know what we want, but oftentimes we convince ourselves that we don't deserve it. Like we feel guilty that we're going to want something. Can anybody relate to that? There are times where if we use the terms that, hey, I need this, you can justify that purchase, doing this, going to that event, whatever else. But when we say, I want this, I've seen it many, many times where people will back away from that because they're like, well, that's selfish. I can do without. And we're going to talk about this here in just a couple minutes about what results we end up getting when we have that type of mentality. So we might kind of know what we want, but we tend to stay away from it for emotional reasons. We might even know why we want it, like Tara said, but because we can't get past number one, we don't even dive into number two very quickly or easily. And then this last one, we just want to know how to do it so we can go do it, right? We're pretty independent people. We're self-reliant. We can do it ourselves. We don't need anybody's help. If we do, we'll grab a family member, but that's as far as we're going to go, okay? So the idea is that the what and the why, and then we get down to the end here, boy, and if you were able to plow through the first two and actually connect with those, now all of a sudden we're supposed to ask for help. We're farmers, we're ranchers, we don't do that. Now maybe you're different, but it's a pretty common theme within those communities about not reaching out because I don't want anybody to know, or I don't want anybody to think this about me, and most of that stuff is all perceived because the greatest advances that we have made on our operation is when we brought in a who. And checked our pride at the door and decided that someone can actually come in and help us and get us further than we've ever gotten by ourselves. So let me talk about what this kind of looks like. Now, I'm going to first talk about the approach that we tend to take. You see if you can identify with any of these. And then we'll talk about what outcomes typically come from that. So this first one, we work hard. There's nothing wrong with that, but we tend to work hard, right? This is what we do. It's not for everybody, and so we work hard. How about this? We do it ourselves. We talked about that already. What about this one? We are willing to do without. When I brought up the whole thing about you need to pay yourself a salary, and that doesn't come out of the profit of the business. That's an expense. That you actually pay yourself to do what you do because you are valuable. But we tend to do without. We'll sacrifice, right? How about this one? We figure out how to survive. It's actually a really great trait to have until surviving becomes the norm and we just accept that that's just as good as it gets. Because then we don't look for more. We don't look for better. How about this? Do we sacrifice our time? Are there things that you would like to be doing, at least with a little bit of your time, that you don't get to do now? Maybe it's kids, or it's grandkids, or it's activities, or it's hobbies, or it's personal growth. For some people, it might simply be sleep. Anybody here have extra time on their hands they don't know what to do with? I'd be interested in trading if you do, all right? We sacrifice our time. How about our health? Do we put our physical health through some things to do what we do? Certainly. Now, I'm not going to suggest that hard work ever hurt anybody. I'm just suggesting that at some point, we're starting to sacrifice more than what's going to sacrifice things that's actually going to affect our longevity. And then how about this last one? Anybody here have a to-do list? Do you get everything crossed off that to-do list all the time, every day, every week? In fact, I have a to-do list, all right? I also have a to-don't list, okay? As weird as that sounds, like there's things I need to remind myself that nature can handle this, or someone else can handle this. Josh, you don't need to micromanage everything. Let some of this go, and that's been a really good list to have. But the to-do list, there are some days when there are so many to-do things on my list, and I'm just not cranking them out, I'm not getting them done. Do you know what I do to make myself feel better? I put something that wasn't on the list that I actually got done so I have something to cross off. Anybody do that? It's usually a few head shakers in there, yeah, all right. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. This is the approach we take. We work hard, we do it ourselves, we do without, we make sacrifices, we have a long to-do list, we do the best we can, and in the end, we survive. What outcomes do we typically get from that? Well, these are outcomes that we expect to get from that. You can determine whether you're actually getting them or not. We expect that by doing all those things, we will find some additional time. My father's famous for saying, well, when we get caught up and when we find some time, and when we get ahead. You ever heard that one? I've been searching for that for decades now, and I haven't found it yet, okay? I'm not sure he has either, but sounds good, right? How about, well, when we find that, when we have some extra money. Maybe you found that, maybe you've made that happen. But if we're just waiting for it, oftentimes it's not going to happen. We do all of those things so that we can have more freedom and flexibility. Are we getting it? Are we achieving it? Anybody here would just like to unplug and disconnect for a little while? In a good way. Like you can just walk away for a week and you can focus on yourself, your family, a hobby. You can unplug and you can disconnect. Now, I'll be honest with you, I've had to get better at unplugging and disconnecting when I go leave the ranch for a week. Okay, Tara and I left yesterday. We're going to get back home. We're going to be home for Friday, and then we're gone for another week. We're back home for a day or two, and then we're gone for a few more days. Back years ago when I couldn't figure out how to unplug or disconnect, it was horrible. I couldn't sleep at night, and granted I still sleep best in my own bed, but I had to figure out how to make this work, and so we've designed our operation so that that is actually a possibility of that outcome happening. We want successful succession, but oftentimes we're working so hard that that just gets put on the back burner. How many here would like to leave a legacy? I think that's important to most of us in some way, shape, or form. Now, a legacy is not, hey, I'm going to leave you 1,000 acres or 200 acres or 20,000 acres or whatever it is. To me, a legacy is something much more than that. Those things might be attached as part of the deal. And how many here at the end of the day would just like to be at peace? Now, I'm not trying to kick reality out of our situation, but if we're doing all of these things over here on the left, in order to achieve all these things here on the right, one of the hard questions I think we need to ask is actually, are we achieving these? And if we are not, maybe something needs to be changed. I'm going to give you a couple of things that we've done to try and make some of those changes, because this is still a work in progress for us, but we've found some things that have worked. And by the way, when we do all of this, and we're not necessarily achieving this to the degree that we would like, what do we claim? I'm not in it for the business. What are you in it for? I'm in it for the lifestyle. But we don't have the time, the money, the flexibility, the ability to unplug or successful succession. Our legacy is questionable because we haven't really worked on that and we don't feel at peace. Where do you see lifestyle in that? Now, I'm not trying to be hard on anybody because we have suffered and dealt with this as well, but oftentimes when it's a good year, oh, we're in it for the business. We're in it to make money. And then we don't have a good year or something doesn't go right, well, we're in it for the lifestyle. And yet their lifestyle is not necessarily what they would like it to be either. Mindset piece. One of the things that Tara and I really like to do is if we get stuck on a problem within our agricultural business, or even our family for that matter, knowing that it's very much impacted by our agricultural enterprises and our business, is we like to look outside of agriculture for some resources that might shed some clarity on how we might break through this barrier that we're dealing with. Oftentimes, as wonderful as agriculture is, we tend to recycle a lot of the same issues because we're dealing with a lot of the same resources. And so sometimes stepping out of the agricultural box and into a different one can provide some insight that maybe we wouldn't gain otherwise. I'm going to put up on here 3 different books that I want to mention and give credit to that are not written with anything agricultural in mind. But they have probably stimulated as much problem-solving success for us, especially recently, as anything that we've had. The first one is here. It says 10x is easier than 2x. And the subtitle is How World-Class Entrepreneurs Achieve More by Doing Less. And you see the authors up there. Anybody read 10x is easier than 2x? Okay, a couple. All right, how about this next one, the 10x rule? You see a little bit of a theme here. The only difference between success and failure. And I'll talk about what we derive from that. And this last one, buy back your time. How to get unstuck, reclaim your freedom, build your empire, yada, 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 right? The whole thing here that caught my attention was the word time. Because as I'm watching my kids grow up faster than I ever thought could happen, my time is very, very limited. And I want it to be working for me. I want my time to be valuable. I want to give and serve and in all of the pieces and not waste anything. Okay? And so I'm looking at these three things, and as we read these books and as we started to mesh, and there's some more than this, but these are the three I'm going to key on with this next exercise that I'm going to have you participate in. Okay. So, operating in 1X mindset. This is where we currently are. This is our current situation. Whatever it is, whether we like it, we don't like it, whatever, it's just right where we are. Okay? And so I'm going to give you this situation, and then you're just going to need to trust me on this and walk with me on this short little journey. But 1X on this particular ranch that we all have together, or that you have individually, if you want to look at it that way, we have 200 cows. Okay? We are making a $50,000 profit. Okay, we don't need to talk about salary or any of those pieces right now. Just look at it at face value. And we are putting in 2,000 hours a year to run this particular business to attain that profit. Now, no matter what numbers I would use, they would not be your numbers, they would not be my numbers, they wouldn't be the right numbers. But that's immaterial, because you'll see where we go with this. Okay, by the way, how many hours, if you work 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, how many hours? 2080, right? So we're real close here. I'm giving you 80 hours off. That's your 2-week vacation, because we have allotted 2-week vacations when we're farmers and ranchers, right? Okay, you get it every year as part of your plan, your compensation package. Okay, so if we're operating in 1X mindset, but let's say that's not good enough. Not because you're greedy or selfish, but let's say that 50,000 does not meet your goals. Let's say every year with that money that you make, some goes back to the business and some you give to others or to other things, okay? And so you decide 50,000 is not enough. So let's go to 2X. So if we do 2X, we're going to double each one of those. Now, I fully understand that just because you jump from 200 cows to 400 cows doesn't necessarily mean it completely doubles your workload. Okay, I understand that. But you are going to have twice as many calves to process, twice as many cows to calve out, twice as many to feed, twice as many to record, track, whatever processes you use, you are going to have twice as many. There might be some economy of scale there, but follow through this. So if we do 2X on cows, we went from 200 to 400. If we stick real true to 2X, what does 50,000 become? 100,000. And if we were putting in 2,000 hours before, now if we're going to double that, because we're going to 2X, what do we have for hours? Not 2,000, but 4,000. Now, by the way, just a tidbit of information, if you work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, how many hours would that be? That's how many hours are in a year. Should be 8,760, I think. The only reason I bring that up, because as we move through this, at some point there will be a limit. Now, do you think it's possible that there's some farmers and ranchers that'll put in 4,000 hours a year? Yeah, it's certainly possible. It's physically possible, okay? Here's the thing. When we operate in 2X mindset and you just jump from 200 to 400, and you jump from 2,000 to 4,000, how do we really tackle that? What's typical agriculture, farmer, rancher, get her done type attitude? What are we going to do? How are we going to make that happen? In most cases, people are going to do what? Work harder, take more on, do with even less. They will still survive, because they will. They're that kind of people, right? They're going to sacrifice more time, they're going to sacrifice more health, and their to-do list is going to get longer. Maybe even seem like it's endless, but it's going to get longer. And what outcomes do we still expect? Like, we're gonna find this extra time, we're gonna find this additional money, we're gonna find this freedom and flexibility, we're still gonna be able to unplug and disconnect and leave for 2 weeks or more. We're still gonna have succession and leave a legacy, and at the end of the day, we'll still be at peace. I'm thinking that's actually maybe harder to achieve with twice as much than it was with just 1x. Now, you can certainly disagree, but let me take you through the third step, and hopefully this is what maybe changes the course. If we take our situation, and we went from 1x to 2x, people in their minds tend to figure out how they're going to accomplish that. And not that it would be easy, but it's not impossible, so they tackle it. They're willing to tackle it if they think that's what's going to help their business, their family, etc., take the next step. But what if we go, well, first of all, let's see where 2x really gets us. It ended up being more money, yes, but also more time, more effort, more work. So you went further up the hill, but guess what? Have we crested? Have things started to get easier? And we find that additional time, the additional money, the freedom and flexibility, and all those things that we expect from those actions? No, we haven't. So let's take one more jump. And stick with me on this. If we're going to go 10x, now we're going to multiply our 1x items by 10. So how many cows do we have now instead of 200? 2,000 cows. If we were making 50,000 before, and it's a linear equation, and we take it times 10, how much profit are we making now? Okay, now here's the real kicker. You were doing 2,000 a year under 1x, 2,000 hours per year under 1x. Where does 10x take you in terms of hours, if it's linear? Is that possible with you? If there's 8,760 hours in a year, if you worked around the clock 365 days a year, like, this isn't physically possible. Because this is not physically possible, but you're in charge of making this happen, where does your mindset go?
Outsource help.
Your mind goes to a place that it didn't go when you just jumped to 2x. Probably. When we only adjust a little bit, we tend to just stretch ourselves that little bit. But when we stretch ourselves way out here, all of a sudden the rules, the program, the production model that you did here, you know it's not going to work. You have to develop something completely different and unique, which also helps you clear all of the barriers that you were dealing with here. Now, I'm not saying there isn't challenges in this situation. I'm just saying that all of a sudden you can't say, well, I'll just work harder, or I'll just sleep less, or I'll, me and my spouse will just buck up and tighten up the cinch and we'll get her done. Like, that's not even possible. Like, this jumped us way out of bounds into a whole different realm that we had to deal with. Let me give you a real simple example of that. A good friend and mentor of mine, his name was Ken Miller. He was a rancher south of Mandan, which of course Mandan's right next to Bismarck, and unfortunately he was killed in a farm accident here about 3 years ago. But Ken was an incredible individual, and he had a way of teaching and sharing with people that only some of the really, really good, he ranked right up there with the best of the mentors and teachers that I've ever had. And I had the opportunity when I worked for the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District to sit in the cubicle right next to him. And so every conversation he had on the phone with someone about conservation or grazing or soil health or ranching or whatever, I got to hear, at least when I was there. And whenever a client would come in and they would have an interaction, even though I couldn't see because the cubicle wall was maybe about this tall and I'd be sitting down, I could hear and listen to his strategy as he would walk people through this. And believe it or not, he was brought onto this team because of his grazing background, and the boss or the leader of that office, a gentleman by the name of Jay Fear, recruited him really, really hard to come in because he wanted the grazing, the operations in Burleigh County to ratchet it up to another level. So he brought Ken in to do this. Anyway, when we get potential grazing clients come through the door, and all the rest of us were trained and were able to utilize this, but if we'd have a really challenging one, guess where we'd send them? Or if we had one who really thought they already knew what they were doing, and sometimes maybe they did, or sometimes they wanted all the benefits, but they didn't want to do any of the work or put in any of the management, guess where we'd send them? We'd send them to Ken. Well, this one day, there's a gentleman comes in, and I knew what this gentleman wanted, and I knew that he probably was going to have kind of an attitude about it. But regardless, Ken worked with him. So the gentleman sits down, and of course Ken's about he was about as mild and just kind of grandfatherly-like as you can imagine. And so just even keeled and calm, and he talked to this gentleman about all of these grazing benefits. And then of course the real kicker with Ken, and I remember the day this guy, he's like, okay, you seem to know a lot about grazing, but do you actually do it? And of course Ken reaches behind him and he pulls out this big map on this cardboard piece, and he shows this individual, yeah, I do this. I've been doing it for 40 years, and I've been doing what I'm preaching to you for the last probably 25 or 30. Anyway, long story short, this gentleman talks about all the benefits that he wants, and so Ken starts him off as saying that on his ranch he's going to need to go from these 2 pastures, he's going to need to go at least to 50. And I couldn't even see this guy, but I heard him gasp when Ken said that. And so he starts on this map that these 2 gentlemen have in front of him. Ken starts drawing lines, all these cross fences that he would recommend putting in. And because I'd seen this happen before, I knew what Ken was up to. And I couldn't help but smile, because he had this place all divided up and checkerboarded up to where this gentleman was like, oh my God, what are you doing? I can't build that many fences. I don't want that many fences. This whole deal. And then finally, when they got down to the end, this gentleman had come in and he wanted to go from 2 pastures to 4. And Ken didn't deny that. He didn't say good, bad, or otherwise, but he took him to 50. And then all of a sudden, by the time this gentleman got done, they agreed on 10 to 12. Why did he take him all the way to 50 right off the bat? He stretched him as far as he thought he probably could, even to a point of being somewhat ridiculous. Because what happened to that gentleman's perspective on how many paddocks he was going to be okay with actually moving forward? All of a sudden 4 wasn't enough. And 10 or 12 didn't even seem crazy anymore. But Ken had to draw him out of his little box that he was in, send him way out there, knowing that he's probably going to need to draw him back in some. So some of the times with our operations, I think we have to go way out there with our ideas and problem solving, because then it reels us back in when we add reality to the situation. But it pushed us far enough out to where we're no longer succumbing to the barriers that are right here in front of us. One of the questions that Tara and I often ask with our ranch, and this has been a difficult one for my father, because he is Mr. Labor from sun up till sundown. It's just how he operates. But we ask the question, if we did not live here, we own the ranch, but we did not live here, how would we get this done? And my father's like, well, I don't understand. We do live here. And I'm like, yes, we do. But what if we didn't? And it puts us into a totally different mindset about how we ought to accomplish something. And guess what? When we did it that way, we found other people could actually contribute very valuable other things to our operation. And what did we finally find by doing and taking that approach? We actually found some additional time. We found some more flexibility. We found, even though we spent more money, like wrote a few more checks, the return that we got and where we were now able to spend our time actually generated more revenue total for our operation. Because you see, when we're in the 10X, I'm sorry, I gotta jump through here. When we're in this here, the first thing that happens is we didn't start with what we're gonna do. We're gonna start with what we expect. We flip that. You remember in the first 2, the 1X and the 2X, what did I tell you we did first? Well, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're hoping to get. We're going to flip that now, and we're going to say, no, this is what we're going to get. Kind of like profit, the equation I showed you earlier when I said keep that sacred. You deserve this, your business deserves it, your business needs it. We are going to decide the outcomes first. We want that additional time, we want that additional money, the freedom and flexibility. We already identified all these things, we just weren't achieving them. But now here's the part that changes. The approach we take is no longer work hard, sacrifice, and survive. This is the reason my wife never wanted to move to the family ranch. Because her perspective on this, correct me if I'm wrong, in the end, there was something worth being a part of. It wasn't good enough. And it's not because she's high maintenance. I can tell you that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I said it publicly. The first thing we had to do, and this is where I had to step up, because I was so used to let's just manage and manage and manage. A good friend of mine by the name of James Rogers, who was a general manager for the Wine Cup Ranch in northeastern Nevada. He did a podcast several years ago, and he said something that I thought was brilliant. And he said, we don't have a management problem. We know the good management practices, and we are capable of the good management practices. We don't have a management problem. We have a leadership problem. And for those of you that are either farmers or ranchers or work in soil conservation or any other entity, you might be able to resonate with this, that there is plenty of good people in management, but if we don't have good leadership, it is really hard to get anything done. And the reason things weren't getting done on our place is because my leadership was lacking. Probably still is, but it's something I put a lot of effort into the last couple of years. We need a clear vision. If we don't know where we're going, there's no way to know whether we've even gotten there if we get there. How about building the right team? I told you how we farmed out our ranch books, okay, to an accountant. And I'm not talking just about like the taxes. I'm talking about the daily data input and kick out of information that we need to actually make good strategic decisions. We now have a company that does that for us. That's just one piece. There's also things that we've had to identify what things we are good at and what things we are not real good at. And don't try and do constantly the things that we're not good at. And if that means we need some training or education, then we gotta go get it. If that simply means it's something that you absolutely hate and you will never get good at and you just consider it to be a necessary evil, well, let's see if there's another option. Let's see if there's another way to get it done, because every hour that you're spending doing the things that you hate is an hour of time that you're not spending on the things that really could make a difference in building your business from a strategic standpoint. And that's this focus on strategic work, not just on being busy. If there's any one thing that farmers and ranchers don't want others to think of them as, what do we not want to be thought of as? What's the one thing that we don't want the reputation of being? How come every group I ever asked that to, and I probably stumble over that question, and there's not a single group in the last 15 years that hasn't been their first and only answer? We are so scared of being lazy or doing anything where someone might perceive we're being lazy, that what do? We stay busy. Sometimes we let busyness control everything else that we do because, well, if we just work as hard as we can all year, there's nothing more we could do. Actually, there is more that we can do. And sometimes it might be better for you to take some time off, to go take a nap, to go contemplate strategy, whatever that might be, might actually get you further. How about creating a culture? We've been on some ranch teams that we've worked with where the culture, like you were there for an hour and you wanted to leave because it was so down, it was so depressing, it was so hard to be around. Debbie Downer type, okay? We've also been around some cultures that raised our level because they were good. Like everybody, and I'm not talking about just being supportive of each other. Like Tara talked about how we like surrounding ourselves with positive-minded people, but we also make sure that we don't just surround ourselves with a bunch of rah-rah people that are gonna just, hey, everything you're doing is right, keep it going. We also want to be called out and challenged when we need to be. Now, when that's done very respectfully, we gladly take it because we think we can learn something from it, and we try to offer it that way as well. But we're trying to create a culture in order that we can run a 2,000 cow, $500,000 profit, $20,000 or 20,000 hour type business, and we are actually better for it. Last two, buyback time. That last book that I listed on there, one of the things he talks a lot about is the 80-20 rule. How many here have heard of Pareto's principle or the 80-20 rule? Okay, where 80% of the value that we achieve is actually done only through about 20% of what we do. And the other 20% of return that we get actually expends the other 80% of our time. And what he talks about is we need to find what 80% work we are doing and find whether, number one, whether we need to do it. And if we don't, we need to stop it. But if it does, we find someone else to do that piece so that you can shift from doing 80% work to doing what? The really high value 20% work. And you keep making that trade. And that's what he talks about. You buy back your time. You actually probably have to hire someone to do the 80% work so that it frees you up to do the 20% work. But if the 80% work is $20 an hour type of job, and the 20% work is $100 or $200 or $500 an hour type job, you outpace it really quick. Like you make that trade, and away you go. And the last one here is the ability to unplug for recovery. You know, we put on these 3-day schools and retreats, and we honestly try and design them to be as retreat style as they can be, and in some locations it's easier to do that than others. But why do you think we don't do 3 separate one-day events? People can't unplug from this type of intense industry in a day. Some people maybe can. Most people, it takes them until most of the way through the second day before we start to see them take a breath, relax, and unplug. And guess what happens when they come back day number 3? They are on fire. They are so ready to dig into stuff and figure out what they want, why they want it, and most importantly, they're after who can help me do this. Who can help me do this because this is something we want. But you can't think that way. It's difficult to think that way if you're still 1 foot in the door and 1 foot back at the farm or the ranch. Okay? It becomes tough to do that. So the ability to unplug, you know, we talk about recovery quite a bit when we're talking about what type of agricultural practice. Grazing, right? Rest and recovery, rest and recovery. I see some people treat their grass better than they treat themselves and wonder why they run out of gas at some point. We need that recovery piece too, and that's when we can actually really dig in and get creative. So those 3 books, how they apply to this, and you see 1X, 2X, but 10X actually jumps us into a whole different realm of thinking. And that's not saying that everybody's got to 10X their operation. I'm just saying sometimes you may need to 10X your thinking in order to make your 1X or 2X operation better, or to actually get the results or outcomes you're after in the operation that you're in. You might not be in a situation where you can 10 times the number of cows or crop acres or that sort of thing, but if you're not achieving the outcomes that you really want, we need to figure out how to scale our thinking in order to get there. Before I go into that example, the 10X is easier than 2X was the first book. The reason that one has spoke to me is because 2X just seemed harder. There were some benefits to it, but in the end, it didn't seem worth it. It was just harder. 10X actually made that jump. The second book was the 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. In that book, what I took from that and meshed in here was that we can do really intense effort, like the type of effort and energy that you can sustain, but only for a short period of time. But if it's very, very focused, like in business startup, for example, that could be the thing that gets you the jump you need. Okay, so very intense effort. But when that intense, unsustainable level of energy becomes your norm, that's when it doesn't have a future. For short periods of time, if you've ever felt that, like you're in the zone and you're gonna do this thing, and it might be 1 hour of a day, or it might be a season, or it might be a week, whatever it is, that jumps you in that way. And of course, that last one, buyback time, that's probably the one I'm most interested in. Every group that goes through our retreats in our schools, we ask them if you could have one thing, if there's something you could have more of, name one thing. And just off the cuff, lots of things will get listed. And about a day later, we ask it again. And what do you think most people say? If they have more time, all of the other things that they're dealing with, they believe they can figure out solutions to. It's when they don't have time, and in this case, don't have time to think, they only have time to just react and do, that's what sets them back from being able to solve those particular problems. Okay, any questions on the 10x, 2x, 1x, mumbo jumbo I just shared with you? Maybe it's a little out there, but it's a non-agricultural, it's been a non-agricultural stimulant for me, if you will, to generate that type of thinking. Let me give you a couple of examples about how we've then applied this. And by the way, the examples themselves are not the key here. It's what outcomes we are achieving because of what we've applied is what's important. So if you look at this and say, oh, that wouldn't work, or I can't do that, or that's not my situation, that's okay. I just wanted to talk to you about what the outcomes were. One of the things that Tara and I have the wonderful opportunity to do is to travel. And in most cases, I'm talking about being able to travel to Billings, Montana, and travel to Alabama next week, and travel to Texas this fall, and these different places to speak and teach, and every once in a while do some direct facilitation. But when we do that, we can't take the ranch with us. Now, we do have a multi-generational deal, and so oftentimes I'm leaving the ranch, or we are leaving the ranch in the hands of my parents, and from a outdoor kind of physical labor standpoint, pretty much in the hands of my father. He's been there for 40 years. He knows the place. He can handle things. He's a better mechanic than I am, better welder than I am. I mean, there isn't too much, other than he's in his 70s, so I try not to load him up with too much workload, okay? But he can do all these things. But what happened, do you think, in January when they decided they're going to Arizona and we're on a road trip from South Dakota to Wyoming and back around to North Dakota, and we're gone for 5 days, 6 days, something like that? And by the way, did you guys have the cold snap here about 3 weeks ago where it was fine, holy crap, and then kind of just pulled back out of it? Guess which week we were gone?
Holy crap.
Holy crap, yeah, exactly. And Wyoming wasn't any warmer, neither was South Dakota, than what I think it was at home. So we have to have this place set up so we can unplug and leave for a week, even if my parents aren't even going to be there. Now, I'll be honest with you, I had a neighbor come over and chop ice 2 days out of there, but that's all he had to do. Because we had our bale grazing set up this way, and what this is we have all these bales, we do all of this work in the fall, when the weather's reasonable. We do this together as a family, so it meets our quality of life pieces. Heck, half the time we're playing games around the bales and whatever else when we're out there. But it's a family piece of this. But we're setting this up so that winter chores become a very easy and efficient way of getting things done. My main goal is time flexibility. Now, there's some soil health benefits that can come from this. There's obviously some quality of life things when we set it up that can come from this. But my main thing is we need, time flexibility, so that if someone else has to do our chores, or in some cases, I can do the chores and they're done for a week. And I can leave. Okay? So we have all these bales. This is actually from probably about 3 or 4 years ago, the one that we set up, because I have a series of pictures. So we're out there, Simon's almost 6 now, so he's not in a stroller anymore. But everybody's cutting twine, pulling off net wrap. My father's got the tractor, he's setting all the bales up. Cows are wondering what the heck we're doing because there's no snow on the ground yet. And I'm working really, really hard taking pictures. Okay? But we're watching everybody do this. And of course, if you want to get somebody to really hit their brakes as they're driving by your place, do something really, really weird, but make sure you do it next to the road. Because then they will have something to talk about, and boy, did we have neighbors stop in the yard and wonder, what in the world are you doing? And most of the time, my father, by the way, would be like, you need to talk to Josh, okay? If you have questions about that, you just wait till Josh is at home. Okay, so winter comes. There's about 150 pair here. It was cows and calves. So 150 pair, they had access to about 18 bales at a time, access so everything could be eating at one time if it wanted to be. Not all of them did, but they had access to do that. The water tank, it's not in this picture, but it's back here. It's a insulated tire tank on well water. We also have a backup source with a creek that runs through back on the other side of this draw. And this would last them, depending on temperature and wind chill, it would last them anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 days. And we would move. Okay? So we do that. That's what it looked like when they were done. They were on to the next one. They were all at the water tank at this point. That's why there's none in this particular picture. Now, we have stretched that out to where it's not a 3-day move anymore. Now we're upwards of closer to 6. This year, I'll be honest, they're a little pickier than they typically are because warm temperatures, there's lots of stockpiled grass around for them to eat. There's no snow on the ground, at least there isn't right now. We'll maybe get some here by the end of the week. So each year we need to adjust a little bit, but all the posts are set up in the fall when we can still step them into the ground. All the bales are set up, all of the strings pulled. Everything is ready, except I haven't strung the poly wire until we're ready to use it because I could string it in the fall and the deer would probably have it down before we got to it anyway. So I just wait until we're ready, we put it up. Chores take us about 15 minutes for the week. Now obviously we had some time invested before, right? But we weren't out there when it was 40 below or even 0. We don't have to start a tractor and let it warm up for X amount of time before we go. My whole day during the winter doesn't need to revolve around when I'm going to go feed the cows. I didn't realize how much pressure that was putting on me when we were doing the feeding every day thing. Every day the schedule had to revolve around when I was going to feed those cows. Now, anybody can go out here, including my kids, roll up a poly wire and be back home in 15 minutes. In fact, my dad told me, he's like, if you keep doing this, he's like, I'm not going to have anything left to do. I retired to come here, so I had work to do. And by the way, there's lots of work to do. But this was something that when I was a kid, we'd feed for like half the night and all day on Saturday. Because that's just how his off-farm job and our schedule worked. And I was home from school and practice and whatever. And so we did it. But then here's some of the other benefits that have come with it. And we were aware of these, okay? But they weren't the primary reason for doing it. You see here where it's darker? These are all the areas where bales were, or the area directly around the bales. And we did research, not on our place, but on this Ken Miller's place and some others. It's anywhere from 4 to 8 times the production in those areas that had impact and extra manure, nitrogen, etc. And where do you think we'll put the bales the next year? Just in between, right? And eventually we'll be done with this particular field, at least for some time. So biological benefit in regeneration, yes. Buying back time, yes. Ability for us to unplug and be able to leave and know that things are still handled, check. And quality time with family when we set it up in the first place, check again. Okay. This all falls back into giving us freedom. Tara has reiterated a number of times, we're either trapped or we're moving towards freedom. What that whole system did for us and continues to do for us to this day is give us freedom. Okay, that's what we're after, that flexibility of time. This is another way that we have achieved levels of freedom. We let nature do as much of the heavy lifting as absolutely possible. The only reason for this picture here is we found out by accident, and I even feel kind of dumb about this, but you know, horses will go out and paw through snow and open up stuff. Cows, when they got to go through snow, what do they use to get through it? Their feet? No, they use their face, don't they? And at some point, it gets hard enough to where our cows start to really, they might start going backwards a little bit because they're only willing to cram their face into so many hard places with ice and snow. But, and our horses are kind of, they think they're high class, so they don't like it when the cows follow them around, but we turn them loose, they open up ground, the cows are following them like a dog on a leash almost. I mean, it's just, that was by accident. But guess who's not doing the work? This guy. Now, this might seem silly or even stupid at some point, But the more ways that we can find to have our cows, our sheep, our horses, our dogs, our soil microbes working for us, doing work, and especially if they're able to do work kind of around the clock when we aren't there or don't need to be there, you want to talk about leveraging time and leveraging labor. That makes a big, big difference. Now, Steve Campbell's presenting at this conference, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think tomorrow and maybe even the next day you'll have the opportunity to go to one of his sessions. Steve's a really good friend of ours. He's been to our ranch numerous times. There is so much that I've learned from Steve and continue to learn from Steve. And I'm going to steal one of his lines here because I think he gives a presentation about this. But he was the one that originally got us moving in the right direction from fitting the genetic code to our zip code. Instead of forcing something to inhabit this area that doesn't fit, we were looking for critters or animals that really do fit. And therefore our input costs and management, those sorts of things should be much easier. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, it's just simply if we were gonna raise animals that really don't handle short grass prairie and hard winters and hot summers, it's better to find an animal that is built to handle those things rather than something that isn't. Okay, and we ask our animals to work for us. Now, when I say that, some people are going to be like, oh, well, you really put your animals through a lot. We care for our animals to a high level. But just like our kids, we don't pamper them. Okay? We ask them to work, and if they work hard for us, they get to stay a long time. Okay? If they don't, then they get to be guests somewhere else at some point along the line. But we're doing this, and by the way, the fact that we are, and this is up for everybody to decide for themselves. I'm not telling anybody what to do, but we moved our calving date from March until May because when we were in third trimester in like January and February, it was hard, especially from a money standpoint, to give those cows all that they needed that late in gestation. But when we can do that in April, rather than back in January or February, because they don't calve until middle of May, it just made the whole thing work a whole lot easier, and they can do more of the work because we don't have to artificially push on them in order to keep them in condition that we need to. I think I turned the volume off on this, so
Plug your
Yeah.
phone.
no, I think I muted it. I love baldy cows in the winter. I really do. This is a bred heifer. She just picked a turnip up, or the leaves off of a turnip that she was finding in there. And our system's not perfect, but compared to how we used to do things, we're just finding that there's so many answers in nature. There's so many ways of just handling these things and letting nature do the heavy lifting, working in sync with it. And without the holistic piece in jumping out of the trap mindset or conventional mindset that we were in, we wouldn't have gotten there. One last example before we shift gears here. I told you that my father is he's a great mechanic. He's heavy equipment, just really, I mean, he's a horsepower guy. Okay, he used to drive enduro cars and stock cars. I mean, he was a racer, and that's just how he's built. That's how he's wired. So we've got this creek running through our place, and it forks a couple times, and we're blessed to have it. But we've noticed that there's some places where the banks have been cut deeply. Well, one of the things that we did this is like when I was a kid, is my parents had spent a lot of time and a lot of effort planting trees around the farmstead, a shelter belt, okay, for good reason. And those trees, after they had nurtured them for about 10 years, which it took a lot to grow trees, it does in our place. The beavers moved in, and I swear it took a third of them out in about a week. And of course, my parents were beside themselves. They hired a trapper, and I think the trapper came in, and in about 3/4 of a mile of stream took out 30 plus beavers. One of the worst things we ever did. We were solving the symptom. We were not solving the problem. You see, what the beavers were doing is creek restoration and street break restoration, right? We didn't see it that way. We didn't understand that. We weren't thinking holistically about it, so we needed to adjust. And so what we did here is we came to the table and they're like, what are we going to do about this? And my dad's like, well, let's look for a dozer. We can rock riprap some of that. We can put this back to a gently sloping bank, but then we need to cover it, and it's probably going to cost us some money, but he said, I can do the dirt work if we can come up with the money for the materials, etc. And of course, my holistic now stimulated brain is like, I don't know if that's what we want to do. And I said, will you let me tackle this a little different way and see what happens? And so we tackled it with cows, and we waited until the ground was wet and it was soft, and we actually put all of the cattle we had at the time, all of the pairs, on just a section of the stream bank at a time, and let them work it down and work it over, just with polywire, that sort of thing. So they had a water source, they got grass, but for the most part we're trying to achieve a high enough stock density so that they're not watching where they step, they just stay up and they graze a little bit, they walk a bit. But you see how they slowly work this bank, work that edge off? And we did this twice. And some of the stuff then that we followed up with recovery time is now more like this. Now, there's still some species in there that I'm not a big fan of, but hey, we're covered. We got forage down to the water. The stream can now, or the creek can now come up, and it's not taking stuff out with it. Like, it's just flowing through, and the forage is keeping stuff intact. We didn't have to burn diesel fuel and big chunk of iron and whatever else to make this happen. We were able to do this with the livestock. And that was a big boon for us because it was low cost and they were going to be somewhere close to there anyway. All right, one of the last things before I shift back over to Tara, probably the most important lesson that holistic management has given us is to get us out of the trap mindset of we just need to be fast and we need to be efficient. And instead, we've adopted that we can actually be slower, but far more effective. Now, any of you who have ever worked cattle probably can attest to what happens if you try and rush things. Versus if you take time, you're strategic, you work with the animals. And this statement is not one I created. I've heard many individuals use this where they say slow is smooth and smooth is fast. What do they mean? If we start out slow, we handle things carefully, and it doesn't mean timidly. It just means strategically and with cautious thought as we're doing it, it will go smooth. And if it stays smooth throughout the process, it actually ends up faster. In the end, we actually get things done sooner. But the biggest thing for us here is the fact that any time we can take the opportunity to improve the land, make a profit, and do it together as a family, like it's the trifecta. It checks all the boxes. One of the problems that I had is that I could go move cattle, I could jump on a four-wheeler, rush out there, open the gate, round them up as fast as I could drive, shove them through the gate, close the gate, and be back to the house. And I actually did that really fast. In most cases, except for the times I had a wreck, which happened more than I care to mention. But when we would actually go, take time, saddle up the horses, which we thoroughly enjoy anyway, go out there, slower pace, teach our kids, observe things on the landscape. And by the way, walking on a horse looking down like this allows me much more observation time than on a four-wheeler at 30 miles an hour, because I don't tend to drive it any slower than that unless I have to. And so the whole piece of this is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Check as many boxes as possible, because I want to provide them as much opportunity as I possibly can. If I felt trapped, the last thing I want to do is trap them unintentionally. And this quality of life that we're talking about, it's really become the crux of all of it. Now, I want to be clear that quality of life leads it, but we don't leave behind good business management and profitable business management, and we don't leave behind regeneration of the landscape.